you may not reach your 10,000 hours on everything that you set out to do,
Mm.
but all of it is what makes your journey uniquely you. Welcome back to the Illuminated Path. This is episode 70. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about the law or rule of 10,000 hours to really become a master at something.
Yeah. So I wanted to do this one because I wanted something a little more philosophical, but also I love this rule or law, whatever you want to call it. Um, I believe it comes from some philosopher. I don't really know, but I am a huge fan of this idea. Um, so the understanding is it takes 10,000 hours to master something. Now, I think there's a lot I want to touch on this. Number one being, and I've talked about this, the master is very much still a student. You know, when I was training MMA, my sensei was still on that mat every day, learning, teaching, but also had his own teachers that would come to the studio to teach him. And so he could continue in his education.
Right.
Um, and he had this understanding that there's always more for him to learn. You know, mentors I've had in trading, no matter how good they were, there was always an understanding there's more to learn.
Yeah.
For that reason, I do not believe you ever truly master something. I think you get skilled enough that it becomes much more effortless, you know?
Well, I think that's like, what is the definition of mastering something? It doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean you're perfect.
Right. Right. And I think that's a good, maybe that's something to touch on. Like, I think there's a misconception that if you master something, you execute flawlessly all the time.
Right. And have nothing more to learn or
Right.
never make a mistake. Like you said, like you can very much be at the point of being so good at something that you've quote unquote mastered it, but there's still more to learn.
Mm.
There's still someone out there who knows more than you, and there's someone out there who knows more than that person. There's always like a line of people who knows even just 2% more than the person that they're learning from. And that's how you continue to grow, and each person continues to like pass down more and more knowledge.
Yeah. And, I even think about if you had, you know, 10 quote unquote masters in a room, there's something for all of them to learn from each other.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a blind side or a weakness in some sense. So,
And they all have something to teach that the
right,
other people don't know. Yeah.
exactly. So, I think that mastery in that sense of like just complete flawless execution does not exist.
No.
Um, I would say mastery is being at a skill level that far exceeds the majority and maintaining that hunger to learn.
Yeah.
I think that's a crucial component of it. So there's another rule in here. I believe this comes from Hormozy, Alex Hormozy, or somebody else.
Or
Don't
he took it from someone
Yeah,
and
yeah.
has been really talking about it.
He's
Yeah.
like modern day philosopher. But the idea is the first 100 hours of working on something generally yield the greatest improvement. So that's where you're achieving proficiency in something. Whereas everything after that tends to be more incremental. It's sort of that slow grinding optimization process.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's something to keep in mind. And I believe when Hermosi talked about this, he mentioned that you know that first 100 hours is actually what keeps most people out. Like most people never take that step because it's daunting to start something new. They never get their first 100 hours.
Because it's a lot of hours.
Yeah, but I,
Like,
I
I'm not
think
even 100 hours into my NLP course.
right, but you've got to look at it in the sense of your 10,000,
Right.
right? Like 100 relative to the 10,000 that you're committing to.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Right. It's a
But
small percentage.
you've got to want it bad enough to start the first 100.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important. Um
Yeah, and it's daunting in those first 100 hours, number 1, to even start at all, like, with hour 1,
Right.
but then to keep going because you don't know, like, what you don't know, there's so much to learn that it can just even be more overwhelming because 'cause you're like, "Oh my gosh, like, there's just so much. Where do I go from here?"
Yeah.
So, to get to that first 100 hours, it's like you really have to commit to knowing, like, you're a beginner again.
Mm,
You're a student. You don't know a lot about whatever this specific thing is, and that's okay, but, like, you gotta push through to, like, keep getting better at it.
yeah. And I think, I've said this before too, but I'm a big fan of the eternal student mentality. But
Mhm,
um yeah, I think really think about it in that sense of like 10,000 hours, and your first 100 being really important for you to achieve. And I'm not saying like you've got to grind it out, like make sure you get that first 100 hours, but if you're really committed to something, give it that 100 hours to really decide if it's for you.
mhm.
um and spend the time. um and so I also wrote in here, I found by 1,000 hours you're very skilled at something. And if you've made it to that point, you're usually in the minority of people who got that far on that path. Like most people are not spending 1,000 hours on a lot of things, especially in today's day and age where we've got social media and people are scrolling, and it's just one thing after the other. Um, People are distracted, and um, I don't. We've talked about. I don't know if we have talked about it actually, like in mysticism and um, ancient like mystery school teachings, the understanding was your power was your attention. So we live in a world where everything is trying to rob us of that. And I think that if you really put in the time to get your 100 hours, your 1,000 hours, right, to reach that skill level, you will do very well in that path. Um, but I think most people don't make it to 1,000 hours.
Yeah, that's a lot of hours when you really think about it. Although in the grand scheme of your life, it's not that many hours.
No, and I think that that's something we'll talk about in a minute too, because I think that you have to be flexible with it, you know. Um, so before we get there, I just want to make a note. Like so much of achieving your 10,000 hours and whatever you want to quote unquote master, right? Getting your first 100 hours and reaching 1,000 hours, like these are important milestones, but I think it's really important to understand how you're allocating your time. We've talked about designing your life. We've talked about your daily routine. We've talked about how you support and work toward your goals. And so much of this comes down to your daily routine. You can't get 100 hours if you're not working on it,
Mhm.
you know? So, like anything, it boils down to your daily routine and how you're getting that time.
Right.
When I started trading, it was I'm there for New York Open every day, and now I'm usually there like 9 to 12, and I get about 3 hours a day, and I'm happy with that, and I'm content, and I know, last year I did about 700, 800 hours, and that feels great, but I never stopped learning, and I loved that part of it. I
Mhm.
love the challenge of doing something that is continuing to teach me and continuing to show me different things.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's also like we were talking about 2 episodes ago is like if you don't have the time for that many hours in a day, right? Okay, well
yeah,
it might take you longer to get there, but you still have to put in some amount of time. Maybe it's going to take you 5 times as long as someone else, but
yeah,
you still have to be able to put 15 minutes, 30 minutes, like whatever you do have, you still have to find the time to put it into your daily habits as a consistent thing that you're working on. And being able to accept if it's gonna take you longer than someone else who just simply has more time in their day.
yeah. And I mean, that's, I think about my own personal experience of trading because we we have prioritized our time and our freedom in the businesses that we've built to such an extraordinary extent that I was able to go trade New York Open and 9:30 to 11, 9 to 12 now. Like I have that time. A lot of people are at their job by that time, So I'm infinitely grateful for the life that I led, that I leading up to that moment,
Mhm.
and having the option to do that. So it always boils down to how you allocate your time for the goal.
Yeah.
So, um, and so the last point I wanted to make in this is really just, we've said this a ton of times, but try things. Um, when I set out to train in MMA, I did thousands of hours of training. I initially intended to um, compete in like cage fights, but you've got to also allow yourself the grace to change your mind and understand that the path changes,
Mhm.
you know? And I've talked about this, but like when I got there and started learning about MMA, I loved the family and the community and the camaraderie of it. Um, and ultimately saw the injuries and realized like I just want to do this as long as I can. And I think that that's really important because my mentality for so long was I'm putting in my 10,000 hours. I was training all these different arts and, um, weapons training and empty hand and ground training and all this stuff. And I was always like, that's my 10,000 hours. I'm working on my 10,000 hours. And I reached that point of having thousands of hours on the mat. But my life got to a point of I had to make a decision. It was MMA or music. And I think that if I was so myopically focused on MMA, it would have taken me away from music. And I've only put out 2 songs, right? But I wouldn't have had those two, if I didn't walk away and take the time that I needed to continue to learn. And I ultimately had to decide like what's more important. Um,
Yeah, but I think there was also other things, like, it was about
yeah,
music, but it was just also about, like, our life and the lives we were building and, you know, I think there was more than just that
no,
as well.
absolutely, absolutely. But I think that my point is just I don't see that as I wasted thousands of hours because I did something and now I'm, on a different path. I think that it's important to understand you may not reach your 10,000 hours on everything that you set out to do,
Mm,
but all of it is what makes your journey uniquely you,
mhm.
and that's important and something to not lose sight of. Like
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed that I walked away of MMA from MMA. I'm infinitely proud of the things I created and what it did for my life and the time of my life. Um, and the hours that I spent learning that and the confidence it gave me and the person it shaped me into.
Well, yeah, because you and that's what we talk about all the time is you're building, like, your life, your identity, like, who you wanna be, how you wanna feel, and, yeah, there's, like, maybe an end goal, but it's about the journey and the everyday and, like, what that's doing for you, and it changed who you were as a person.
Yeah.
Just because the end goal changed doesn't mean that you didn't enjoy every step of the journey and that there was so much that you were able to take from that.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that,
And that goes with anything.
that says it well. There's thousands of hours and no, I didn't get to 10,000, but there's so much I got to take from that.
Right.
Um, and it was about the journey of who I was becoming.
Mhm.
So all that to say, I think give yourself the grace because what you choose to put in your 10,000 hours on very well could change, but it doesn't mean that the time you put in is wasted. It means that that's just one more part of your journey and who you were becoming.
Yeah.
Anything else to add?
No, I feel like this was a mostly you episode, so
Great.
I added in where I could,
Yeah.
but no, it was good.
All right. So figure out where your 10,000's going. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.